Your mic's not on. Your mic's not on, Howie. I'll just go ahead. He's not going to make it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to River City Media, Beyond the Booth. We've got head coach Joe Guthrie. Howie having a little bit of technical issue. His mic's not working. Coach, once again, welcome in. Another good week for Mustang softball. I know the rankings just come out. Retain the number one ranking in Northeast in the junior college rankings. That's a great thing, but the challenges get tougher.
Yeah, we're fortunate. We're just trying to take everything, one day at a time. I mean, that's kind of where you have to be. We've got, 16 conference games left. There's 32 total. I've said this publicly before. Before I took this job, I was in the SEC. Same deal in terms of you've got, 9 weeks, 8 weeks that are actual playing of a conference opponent. One bye is built in there. The difference being at our level, we add another game. So it makes it extremely difficult. This is why you've got to be in good shape. You've got to have a plethora of talent. You've got to have people in roles that sometimes have to step up and play larger roles. Those are all part of ingredients of dealing with adversity. And continuing on a championship march. Nothing is ever taken for granted. We talk about that every single time we play and practice. And, last week was a good example of that. This week will be another example of that. And it's a grind. This is conference play, no matter where I've been, is always a grind at every level. And, so far we've responded to those challenges, and we need to continue to do that as we move forward.
Well, Coach, the success is great, and the team has moved up the rankings, and it's a thing to get excited about. But after a little bit of amount of time, that kind of thing kind of wears off. You get respect, and then you're going to get everybody's best. So therefore, like what you're talking about, it's easy to take it one day at a time because no matter who you're going to play, and we saw it over the weekend. Yeah, it's a 4-game sweep over Snead. But Snead gave you everything you wanted. I mean, they really played well in the series.
They did. Tracy does a good job. They're only 4 years removed from going to a World Series themselves. He's been around a long time. He's been to a lot of World Series when he was at Wallace as an assistant. So a lot of experience there. I've been to that ballpark, I don't know how many years. They were in our conference when I was at Marion. And it's a weird place. It says 205, and I'm not trying to create any controversy that it's not 205. But I do know this: the ball carries really well in that ballpark. That's not a team that, ordinarily in most ballparks is known for a lot of power, but certainly they showed some there. And we knew going in, we had some adversity. We had to deal with a lot of adversity. We had players that were sick. We had players that came up lame. And in the first 2 games, we had to shuffle around lineups. Fortunately, we're versatile and can do that, and we've got a good mix of, some power, some speed, some kids that can play multiple positions, and some veteran kids that have been in our program for a while that had to step up in some moments, and it took all of that to win. So I'm real pleased with our players' ability to, be team first and deal with their roles as they come. And this weekend was a good example of why that matters. If certain players are not ready in certain moments that they necessarily haven't been in as prominently as they were up to that point, we don't win. Good examples of that are, Sophia Murphy. I thought that was a really, really critical situation in the first game. Addie had been coming off sickness, weren't really sure how much gas would be in the tank. And of course she threw just a phenomenal. I mean, that was, one of the best performances I've ever seen anywhere that I've been. Being a batter away from a perfect game, then coming out and throwing, I think it was 2 2/3 more of no hit ball after that. Just an incredible performance. We needed it. But, Sophia coming up, we have a runner at third. We had Bree Wilson that came in for, Chloe Hatch, kind of give us a speed option off the bench. She gets to third base. And then, Sophia almost executed the suicide squeeze, and we're going to slash and run that she executed well right after that. Those are hard to do. Bree saw the up read, got back to first right away, tagged on time. So they did a lot of things well in that moment. And, that's just a, kind of a how to win awareness that showed there. We had a lot of kids. Chloe Helton came in relief and held pretty well. We needed her to do that. I think she went even a little bit further than we had anticipated her using her there. So I thought she did a good job. We had a lot of players. We asked Acuff to play third, play second. She did that. We had to have a lot of, unselfish moments. Austin McNeese comes off the bench, has a big RBI single that kind of, extended the lead to where it's harder for them to put the tying run at the plate. And of course, some of our standbys, Weston, McCluskey, Hatch, Lump were just outstanding for us, throughout the series. And, Morgan Perkins continues and Acuff and some of those guys, Heineman down at, in the lower half, Sullivan, continue to make our lineup really, really challenging from top to bottom. So I'm real pleased with, what we got out of that group for sure.
Yeah, and you were talking about that little bit of adversity, having Addie out sick, and Aaron Harrelson and Kaylee Warnock had to both pitch complete games, being short on the roster. But then again, you were talking about some that have came in and contributed. I know in the series, even Jada Hampton coming at one point got hit by a pitch. She also walked in another part of the series. So some of those folks, and you had talked about expanding the roster, and you were kind of forced to do that due to a little bit of injury and sickness, with Hyman getting hit in the head. The other girl for the other team went out with a knee injury. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's great for those young ladies to be prepared, because you never know when your moment's going to come. And that was a perfect example for Sophia Murphy to get an RBI that was crucial in that 2-0 win.
Yeah, I thought, those kids, it doesn't surprise me that they are able to do that because of the way that they practice every day. I don't have to guess what I'm getting out of Sophia Murphy in practice, Pearl Bellamy in practice, Sierra Walding in practice. Savannah Cantrell could arguably be the hardest worker we have on the team. You could make that argument. And, she got her number called in the start, and she played very well. Got a key hit early in that last game, kind of set the tone for us. I thought her at-bats were good. Thought she did a good job behind the plate. The zone was kind of floating late. We went back to, McCluskey, who's had a little bit more experience back there, which, as the game got tighter, that helped. But I was real pleased we got Savannah some time. That was something we talked about with her, in the week, that we wanted to get her a start. Because she's going to be a really, really good player for us. Just needs time. And unfortunately, we've got a wealth of talent behind home plate right now. But she can certainly, she showed that on Saturday. She's certainly capable of doing the job. And in her starts has done a good job for us. So, it's a nice problem to have. Bree Wilson's very similar. In the outfield, we've got, kind of an embarrassment of riches out there in Weston and Hatch and Sullivan, who played as well as anybody in the country all year. But, Bree is right there with them. It's a shame I don't have 4 outfield positions to put them all in, because the way that they practice and play every day is certainly indicative of what you saw this week. And we're going to need everybody. So I real pleased with that out of our team. People being ready to go right off the bench when we need them to do that, for sure.
Yeah, because the one thing about Lorelei Sullivan, her bat, it's hard to take her out of the lineup, and then she has improved so much defensively. I know she made a highlight reel diving catch in that Wallace series. That was, her and Emery Burke made 2 great plays in that series, and against Wallace, defense was the key, because I think the difference in that series was Northeast defense, because they made some brilliant plays.
They're a good team. They're not the type of lineup that, you can just, obviously Chertel's the focus, but there are other pieces there that you can't sleep on. And those guys make plays. I thought they were as good a defensive team as we've probably seen all year. The outfield really, really throws well. That was something that we had to kind of pick and choose when we were taking our shots at home plate because they throw the ball very well, out there. So, those kind of moments we were good in. I was pleased with that. And we've got a challenging couple days of practice in front of us. There's a lot of things that we need to rehash and go over before we head down to Coastal, who's a very good team. They swing the bat very well. They've got one of the best hitters in the country, and their pitchers, I feel like, have thrown better, during conference than they were earlier in the year. And that's a team that's used to winning, similar to Wallace. So it'll be a good challenge for us. Of course, the distance on the road is one of the bigger ones that we have. That's why we went, and did some things like Louisiana, in the fall. So, to put this in perspective for the springtime. So, we've got to get a couple of days of really good preparation in front of us, and then go to work on Thursday.
Well, yeah, and speaking of Coastal South, right now you're in front of the standings. They're 5 games back right now. Wallace is 4 games back, but Coastal South's only 3 back in the loss column. If they have success in their series, they're right back in the hunt. So this is a lot more of a crucial series than people think.
Yeah, I mean, we just look at it as what we need to do. We look at it, every pitch at a time, every inning. We're trying to win every inning. We're trying to make adjustments, as a coaching staff and as a team and as individuals on what the game is telling us to do, when it's telling us to do that. And I thought, for the most part in that series, we did a pretty good job. And sometimes, it was kind of a weird day, on Saturday. I thought, the Bunch kid did a good job changing speeds. We didn't adjust to that very well. We were able to get one crucial 2-out hit. And then, of course, Murphy's execution allowed us, to stay in it. And, of course, Addie kind of took some of the pressure off because she threw so well. And the defense played really well in the first game. In the second game, we jumped out to a good situation. We knew that, some of the kids that have been typically kind of out of the pen for us had been taxed earlier in the week, kind of make up for some of the slack, because we were thinner in the pitching staff. And we managed that okay. Had a couple pitches, couple flubs, defensively that extended the game, which we've got to get better at. That fourth game is when you have a tendency your feet will betray you on defense. It becomes kind of a marathon of physical and mental concentration, but we weathered the storm there. And then, the good news or the bad news was we left the bases loaded, a couple times later in that game. That was the bad news. The good news was as long as we held serve, you're continuing to turn over the lineup. And because we had turned over the lineup, to score 7 runs early in the game, and because we were continuing to do that, we didn't score, but I had a pretty good feeling it was coming. Just because there've been, that many times that's happened. So, obviously the lump 2-run homer was big. McCluskey set the table there, and then we just sort of, poured the gas on the fire after that. So that was a good way to finish. I'm proud of the girls for that, especially with all the substitutions we made, to get things going. And, they hung on, and, we're going to have some wild ones, as we go through, and it's all about, continuing to respond to adversity.
Yeah, I thought Chloe Hatch did ball, pretty well. She gave up the home run, right behind an error, but I thought she pitched pretty well. And of course, McCluskey, well, she had a great game, had the single and the home run, 3-run home run in that inning to kind of cap it off, but she had a home run earlier. She had a great day down there. She was 4 for 5, I think, with 5 RBIs and 2 homers. She just continues to improve at the plate. And another one that I think is getting better, Coach, offensively. Of course, defensively, she's an outstanding player. Is Morgan Perkins. It seems like her bat's starting to come around. She's got a great eye. She draws a lot of walks, but she's starting to get some big hits.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's helped her. When 5 and 6 particularly are rolling. That 7 spot for us is we've got to spin the wheel and turn it over. And then, Hyman understands, that 8 spot is kind of a hybrid role. There are going to be times we ask them to take bases. There are going to be times we ask them to bunt. There's going to be times we need them to clear it off. She does a really good job of understanding when those moments are. And then Sullivan is just kind of a turnover kid for us down there. I mean, she's going to do something to get on base. She has a lot of ways to do that. And then when she does it, we end up in a good situation because you've got a Hatch with speed, you got a Weston with speed, McCluskey, is such a weapon for us because there's not too much she can't do offensively. So, and then that rolls it back into the meat. So all that's good. Perkins has done a lot better job of understanding what she swings at and hits well and what she doesn't. And that's been the biggest, kind of maturation moment for her. She's still learning, but, you can see the flashes of brilliance there as a freshman, and she's steady. You know what you're going to get pretty much every time out. So real pleased with her development so far.
Well, I'm going to ask you one more thing, and I'll let Howie jump in and ask a few questions before we go a little deeper. But I want to speak about.
I think you froze up, Coach.
I think you did too. Yeah.
Yep. Ooh, the world of technology, like we talked about earlier before we went live. I don't know what happened on my end, but it ended up booting me completely out. But Coach, what a start to the season! Would you ever dream that your season would have started off, 35-1 at this point?
Yeah, I knew that we were going to have a good team. I'm not surprised, honestly. I'm surprised that not so much record, the stuff that I'm pleased with right now that we've got to continue to do is how we're responding to adversity. We talked to the team part of this week. We're going to continue to do that again. We hit on this last week of, there's a saving speech that's out there about what does it take to break you as a definition of mental toughness. And obviously that was probably a good thing to go with this week because it was very challenging this week. It's going to be very challenging at Coastal. So that's kind of the point where we are during the year, is it takes a lot of focus and discipline, but the mental toughness piece allows you to activate those two other items, the focus and the discipline, which will lead to execution. Nothing that happens for the remainder of this year is going to be easy. It's going to be harder than it has been. And so, it demands us to be locked in and take every rep and every practice, with full volume intensity. So, that's what we have in front of us. And I'm pleased, but I'm not necessarily surprised because I have a pretty high expectation of what this group is capable of doing. And we try to raise that bar a little bit each week with them for sure.
How do you keep your team focused? You got that big bullseye on your back coming in at 35-1, number one in the nation and everything. How do you keep your team focused on the task at hand, one game at a time?
Well, I mean, there's still a lot of things we've got to improve on. I thought, there were a couple things, from a coaching staff standpoint, I thought, there was a move I made that maybe was a little early. Another one may have been a little later. We kind of cheated on an outfield shift and that didn't work out for us. That led to some runs. On the other side, we've got to continue to do a better job of executing in moments. It almost burned us, on Saturday in terms of, leaving runners on. We've got to do a better job there of making productive outs. I think we've got to be a little bit better on the left side of the infield at times, especially late in the game of trusting our fundamentals. We made a couple plays that I felt like fundamentally we weren't where we needed to be, and that's a physical fix we need to go to, and then mentally just understanding we've got to close out games a little bit better. And those are all items that fall into playing against the game. The momentum innings we talk about answering. When another team scores, we have to score immediately. That's something we talk about, work on, and practice constantly. The countdown innings, we want to be 1, 2, 3 and done with a lead in the last frame. We haven't always done that. But we have managed for them not to score, which is good. Because at the end of the day, we hold, serve, and win. And then the other piece is shutdown innings. If we score, they cannot in the next frame. So if we can really continue to, kind of put a premium on those items, we'll get better, and we've got to do a better job of stretching leads early in the game if we get out to a fast start. All of those are 100% tied into momentum. I thought we did a really good job in the first two games of starting fast, finishing quickly, and getting ourselves out of there, especially when we knew we were a little shorthanded on the pitching side. That was critical that we did that. I don't think that our team would have done that, say, a month or two ago, so I feel like that's a growth area. I thought we ran the bases very well. There were several plays where if we don't have pretty heads up base running, we don't allow ourselves for the big inning. So all of those items add up to wins. If you don't get down bunts, if you don't execute short game items, if you don't hit with 2 outs, if we don't, take walks when we need to, if we don't fight with 2 strikes, all of those items add up to whether you win or you lose. I thought the pitching staff did a really good job for the most part of limiting charity, and so, those things again directly correlate to whether you win or lose. So we've just got to continue to value those items, continue to recognize them, and do what the game is telling you to do when you're told to do it. And, we were successful in that regard this week.
Speaking of the pitching there at the end, I'm kind of a numbers guy, not an analytics guy, but a numbers guy. But your ERA is 2.02, 15 shutouts on the year. So, my math is not great, but it means nearly half your games have been shutouts this year. So, meaning that most of your games have been shorter than normal 7 innings softball games. Do you think that's going to help you toward the end of the season, not playing as many innings as some of these other teams have?
Yeah, I mean, it's got to, and that's not necessarily, we're not planning. We plan on playing 28 innings when going into a series. And sometimes it gets more than that, like Saturday was. But if, you're going to run into some days like Saturday, like the 4th game on Saturday, and it certainly helps you, series are all interconnected. If we don't get out to that fast start and say we have to go, deeper in game 1 or game 2, that's going to hurt us or put some pressure on another aspect of the game, meaning offense, to be able to complete a sweep. So, I thought from that standpoint, we're connecting the dots there in order to, achieve success. And it's tough. There's in that first game on Saturday, we hit some balls really hard and they made some good plays. They made, I think, 2 or 3 catches, the center fielder, Saletti, who's a really good player. She's an all-conference player for those guys. She made multiple catches up against the wall. I mean, 8, 9 times out of 10, those are hits. And she did a good job. She took those plays away from us, and you've got to be able to keep turning the lineup over, keep swinging, keep continuing to take good at bats, and not folding when your opponent does something like that. So I thought we did a good job. The pitching staff responded. If something like that happened to us, we get a line drive to end an inning with runners on, to center field, then we're getting the next 2 or 3 hitters, and all of a sudden the momentum's swinging back to us. So I think we're doing a good job of recognizing what it takes to win. But all those things matter. We blew a sign in the first innings, not stuff that goes in the box score. That altered the first inning. We end up with 1st and 2nd and 2 outs. It'd been a lot different. We have 1st and 2nd and 1 or no outs. So those are little things that we've got to be more aware of. And I felt like we corrected that some in the second game. So those are certainly going to be things that we look at to get better. And we've got to constantly take inventory of those things, because we always say, the mentality creates the right intent. The right intent creates the right outcome. And so that's where we basically keep our focus in practice and in games, because the results, if you do those things, are going to take care of themselves. And the result stuff and the polls and all that are fun for everybody to chatter about. But for us, that's where we have to keep our focus, of what our mentality is, which create a good intent, which creates a good outcome. And if you're there and in a process orientation, you're going to have, sustained success over time. So that's where we really want to be.
You mentioned the rankings kind of during that part there. Did you bring it up? Have you brought it up to your team, or have y'all said much about being ranked number 1 in the nation?
No, I don't really. I've said publicly, and everybody, I don't care. I'm happy for the fans. I'm happy for the school. I'm happy for everybody that supports us. The only ranking that I'm interested in is the one at the end of the year when we hopefully win a national title. That's the one that we're shooting at. That's a goal. But I'm not, it's not lost on me that I'm proud of the recognition for our players and for the fans and for everybody that supports us. That's good. But for us, in terms of an internal focus, it's an external factor. And external factors, in my experience, especially when you're on this journey of adversity, can derail you. We're not obtuse to the fact that we have it, but it's certainly not, it's not a goal of ours to do that, except when the last pitch is thrown, and hopefully in the national championship game. That's the one we're working towards. So, we're not certainly not unaware of it, but it's not something that we speak of in terms of a goal. We've mentioned it a few times, but mainly as kind of a rat poison effect to make sure that we're focused on what we need to do to continue to be successful. And it's not just about softball. The mentality creating the right intent creating the right outcome. That is the process for life. That's something we spend a lot of time with our players about. We're supposed to be teaching the game of softball. We're supposed to be teaching, how dealing with adversity, emitting personal courage, using discipline to get over these, these things in life that are going to be challenging. They're going to face challenges. All of our players, all of us will face challenges that are far greater than winning softball games or championships. So, it doesn't get lost on me as a teacher first that, we need to value those items, because ultimately what we're doing is we're trying to inject those lessons into people so that when they leave here, they can conquer and win in their life, because adversity is coming. Adversity is coming. I mean, we all probably, most of us went to Easter Sunday sermon yesterday. Obviously that's one of the most humble and, adverse lessons ever. And so, that ties in to things that we do in our lives. And the game on a much smaller level teaches you that. So that's really what we're trying to get across every day, to make better people. And so I think that's happening successfully right now, but we got to be diligent to continue to value those things in order to sustain success.
One more question on the pitching aspect. Your team pitchers is holding the opponents to 224 batting average. You got to be pleased with that because in softball, anything below a 3 is pretty much fantastic. And you're down at 224, nearly at the Mendoza line.
Yeah, I think, it's definitely, the game's changed a lot. In the time that I've been in, it's absolutely an offensive game, nowadays. There's a lot of reasons for that, but I think our pitchers have bought into what we're trying to do to get individual hitters out, what we're trying to do in an overall sense of a series of what we need to do to be successful against a certain team, and how they do things as an offense that we're trying to take away from them. This team that we're going to play, they've got one of the best hitters in the country, and Sydney Carpenter, that I think's got 15 home runs and over 50 RBIs. She's a very dangerous hitter. And so, that's the one that for sure we don't want to have beat us in moments. They've also got some other players that are very good. Those are things that we've got to discuss and make sure we have a very precise plan. We have discussions as a staff of kind of, here's plan A, here's what we think we're going to do. And then when we get in these critical moments, here's plan A, B, and C. And that becomes more critical as the season marches toward, kind of the really dramatic conclusion of the regular season and the playoffs. So, all those things are things that we're definitely, all on top of as we move forward into a week.
Phil, regardless of what sport you're playing, defense wins championships. I don't care what anybody says. And with Coach Guthrie and his pitching staff and defensive alignment, it seemed like they're well on their way to possibly winning a championship.
Well, yeah, there's no doubt about that. This team is very good on the defensive side. They get great jumps on balls, minimal errors other than, game 4. I think they had 3 errors. That's kind of a cross there. But sometimes that's just going to happen. Well, Coach, I didn't get to ask you because I got knocked off. Addie Edwards pitching a no-hitter. She goes down in history. You have to be proud for that young lady.
She's like I said, that's one of the gutsiest performances I've seen. She was pretty sick, earlier in the week. She was one. Emma Heineman was another one. Those kids they came to me in tears wanting to play. I mean, you think about all the stuff that gets talked about of their generation of they're soft, they don't know how to solve problems. A lot of it's true, but you need to take inventory as a coach when you have those type of moments of you got kids that's how much they care about. And Addie wasn't talking about her individual. She goes the both of them. Emma had the same conversation made with the neck thing that happened. They want to be there for their team. They want to be there for their team. They feel like when they're out, they're not helping their team. And, especially with Hyman, I talked to her. I said, you can really help our team whether you're in or not. I want you in the game too, just like you want to be in the game. I want all you guys to be able to get in the game. But you can also help, a young Austin McNeese help herself out in a big moment of, helping with the calls, helping her out. She respects you and vice versa. And let's help the team get better when you're not in there. And she just took that and ran with it. I thought Austin did a good job of being a humble teammate on the other side. She gets up in a critical situation. The base is loaded in the fourth game, and she does her job. That's what a team does, but when you've got two kids like Addie Edwards is special. I mean, it's not, you guys see the physical side of that in terms of the results, but she's a different kid. I mean, and I mean that in the most positive way I can possibly say it. I told her after the game, I said, don't ever let anybody tell you in this life that you do not have guts, because she absolutely has it. But it's not, she's not chasing accolades. She didn't come here. What you saw, I thought, in that game also ties into how Addie ended up here. I mean, you can cut on TV in any series, I don't care what level it is, and know about how she pitches and watch a lot of the pitchers there and see there's not much. She's pretty good. She would hold her own and has, in some of those scenarios in the fall. But she came here to get better. That was her stated goal here. She wants to get better. And you think about the humility it takes to do that. She had multiple Division I offers before she came here. But she wants to get better, and she wants to try and play at the highest level she can. And that is different in today's generation. Most people, are chasing, hey, I've got this offer because I want to get on Instagram and put the jersey on. And that's not what she's about. She's about trying to be the best version of herself. And I think that speaks volumes to what's character-wise to her, and it bleeds over to our group. Hyman was a similar situation. I mean, she cares about being able to do her best for the team. And those two are not the only ones that fall into that category. That's why this group is very special. And I think it's just really, really positive. And I'm very grateful to see that every day as the leader of the team. It's a real fun experience to be a part of this group. And hopefully we continue to value those things. And if we do, there are some pretty special goals in front of us that I think we can achieve.
Well, Coach, one thing I have noticed about Addie is being as many games as I've been at, when she gets that ball back from the catcher, she walks back to the mound, and when she turns to the plate, you can just tell she's in command. You just can see that with just the way she stands. She just looks like she's in command.
Yeah, I think winners win, and champions win championships. And, that's what she's done. There are several kids on our team that have that pedigree, that won championships. They understand what that's about. That's something we look for when we recruit kids. Those kids, there's just a lot of kids on this team. Acuff is another one. If I turn my back, there's no question in my mind where she is. McCluskey, Lump, there's just, the improvement of Kylie Weston from when she got here to now is incredible. She made a lot of plays. She's stepped up when we needed her in many, many moments. She's a much better base runner than she was. She's become a better leader than she used to be. I get a lot of calls all the time about players in our program. And, I'm like, these guys to me are no-brainers. And I'm saying that as somebody that coached at a high level. And it's a testament to their work. It's a testament to what they value. And we've got to continue to do those things and not be satisfied so that, we can achieve what I think we're capable of doing. So I'm real pleased with all those guys for sure.
Well, Coach, I guess the greatest thing for a coach is you can tell another coach, just look at what you see. I don't have to tell you anything. They show it on the field, they show it in the locker room. I don't have to say a word because they sell themselves, so to speak.
Yeah, it's just it's very pleasing, to see some of these kids, especially the ones that have been in our program for a couple of years, the growth and the confidence that they've gained since they've been here. We believe confidence comes through competence, the ability to teach it and the ability for them to absorb that and put it to good use. And so I'm really pleased with our players' buy-in in that regard, and that bleeds over now to where we have a culture of that's kind of where everybody is on this. And when that happens, when you have adverse moments like we had Saturday, we were looking inward, which is where you want to be, relying on the people next to you to get the job done. And a lot of people, fortunately for us, were able to do that, and it worked out. But just a gritty team win, and we definitely want to build on that going into this series, because that kind of play is going to be very critical for us in moments that are headed to our way of adversity.
Of course, Coach, you always want to keep on an even keel. You're the head coach. You've been through the ups and downs. You've been in the military. So, you observe a lot, but it has to warm your heart to see these young ladies have success, even though a lot of times you can't pat them on the back, but it has to warm your heart to see the smile.
Yeah, I'm real pleased. Like I said, I use that confidence word. I think, Chloe Hatch and Kylie Weston and Kaylee Warnock and, Sierra Walding and some of these kids have been around a while. Sophia Murphy, all of those kids, one of the commonalities, they're going to be, and I told them last week when we had meetings, I'm getting sad, as we go into sophomore day, because they're all going to be outstanding women. They're going to, if I were, running a job, I would hire them all. And they all are more confident and can stand on their own 2 feet and act on their own words, which is the ultimate goal of our program. So, the softball stuff that they're doing really is just kind of the gravy, on top of the steak. But, that ability to be confident and stand up and be counted and be someone that you can count on is something that I think that they've worked through adversity to get toward, and I'm very pleased with that. Sitting where we are, in their development as that chapter is going to close pretty soon, unfortunately, but they're certainly carrying that the right way.
Well, of course, and Coach, and they understand this too. They know they're going to be worked hard. They expect it. They don't expect anything different.
Yeah, and I think that's a choice. We used to talk about in the infantry, when it's 4 o'clock in the morning, you're about to do a 16-mile road march, none of it's raining. You're not going to get anything to eat. Your feet are going to be killing you. I mean, all the things that are, that are there that you've got to work through, and attitude, it starts with that. Attitude is a choice, and we all make good choices, and sometimes we make bad ones. And, I think they've embraced that, that you have a choice. You are in charge of your own feelings. Courtney tells the pitchers all the time, do your best and don't feel sorry for yourself. And, that's kind of, when you think of it in a very simplistic way, that's kind of what you have to do in life. And, with that, you gain a certain level of individual responsibility and confidence to be able to solve your own problems. And I feel like those are things that we used to value a lot better and taught those things a lot better, than we do today in society. But I certainly think that our group can do that and have done that and will continue to do that as long as they embrace the process. So I'm pleased with that. And that's really, probably one of the most important things that you'll get out of our program.
Yeah, of course, that's the big thing in life. Get through today. Tomorrow will take care of itself. And so that's just the way that goes. Well, Coach, the girls kind of sort of brought out a little personality, played a good April Fool's joke. Tell us a little bit about that. They hung the Texas flag on the flagpole. I guess they got to be themselves a little bit.
Yeah, I wasn't. I got in on, my recognition of when that first happened. I was kind of, I don't know if it was them or it was somebody in the faculty, but they really hammered Jimmy's car. There were a bunch of Post-it notes all over the place. Then they had pictures of all the coaches on mine. I knew something was up early when we went into our team meeting. They had a big blown up picture, on my chair coming in, and they did it very well. They had a practice plan that, was kind of off the wall, but funny. They taped up my fungo. They did a lot of stuff, but I appreciate that. Briley Weber went all out. She's one of our two, native Texans, and flew the Texas flag, up on our flagpole, which was cool. I appreciate that fact that we do. I'm a serious guy. I'm not the guy that they're going to confide in all the time or even really see coming a lot. That's more of Jimmy and Courtney. But we do try to let them be themselves, and we do like to have fun. It is a balanced staff in that regard. But I appreciate that. It definitely made my day better. I'm not really the guy that shows that as well as some of our other coaches, but I greatly appreciate that, and it's good that they can have fun and feel like they are in an environment where they can do that. And then they did that, and we had a great practice. So I was pleased that we can kind of balance the silly stuff and then go to work when we need to too. So they're a good group, and I'm very, very fortunate and happy that we have them.
I'm sure there are times they are loose, but once they walk past that foul line and onto that field, it's all business.
Yeah, we try to allow in our prep, both sometimes that we're doing things that need to be done to get ready for a game. And then there are times when they're playing hacky sack or they're doing all kind of stuff where they need that time. It can't be serious all the time, but you need to know when the lights are on and focus on what's in front of you. And I think they do a good job balancing that. If you watch our team, it is a little more disciplined and businesslike. Not saying they don't have fun. I just don't. I have a problem as a coaching profession right now. You alluded to the April Fool stuff and having fun. It's not like we don't have fun. We don't have a good time. I feel like with the advent of social media combined with television, I see a lot of things on these broadcasts where these are 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, in some cases 24-year-old kids. And, it looks like they're acting like they're 10 years old. And I'm all about having fun, but it's an immature response to something that you spend a lot of time doing, and you do it with a high level of discipline and intensity. And the response is not, there's a difference between fun and then get back to business and being a clown. And I feel like that we have fostered an environment with the advent of some of those things I talked about, social media, where we're not really, to put it in a phrase, teaching kids to really grow up to the level of maturity that their position in life requires. And so I feel like that's a byproduct that starts really early on in education. We hover over them. We don't let them problem solve. We try to cut a joke on a situation that really requires some time and effort and some intensity to solve. And, in a serious society, one that can be taken seriously, I should say, you would scoff at those things and value the things that are important. And I feel like that's something that is not as permeated in society as it used to be. And that's something I talk to our kids about a lot is, are you somebody that can be counted on, and are you a serious person? Because when you go into the job market, or you're looking for somebody to marry, or you're trying to be a success in many things in your life, and eventually, you're going to be, a wife, a mother, those are serious obligations. And that doesn't mean you can't have fun, but I do think that we don't stress that enough of, it doesn't mean you need to have a ton of anxiety, but we need to teach them how to get over adversity and problem solve and act on their own thoughts. And, I feel like the constant clown show, I can't even watch college baseball anymore. I was fortunate enough to play at a high level, but the things that they do now, we would have adjudicated on the field. That'd be the best way I could say that publicly. And now it's just, I feel like there's a lot of show up stuff, unnecessary stuff that really isn't very sportsmanlike. I feel like our team does a really good job of when we do something right, they celebrate amongst themselves. We don't rub it in other people's faces. We don't feel like we need to do that. You need to win with humility. You need to lose with humility. You need to constantly take inventory of the items that you did to do well, and you need to always respect who you're playing. And those are things that I believe. And I just feel like we've gone away from that a lot in today's era, especially with all the media everywhere. So that's how I feel about it for sure.
Well, yeah, and I understand what you're saying is that the fun is in the winning naturally. And you have to do that with class. And the biggest thing is act like you've been there before, because you don't want to disrespect anyone else. That's like, just for instance, when I'm doing the PA at the softball games, I'll announce the winning pitcher. I don't announce the losing pitcher because they know. I don't have to say anything, and that's the last thing I want to do is rub an opponent's nose in the face, because me being an announcer, I have to be pro Northeast, but I also respect the other team, and that's the way it should be in society.
Yeah, we have a phrase on our team, don't poke the bear, and that is that goes our way and it goes the other way. If we feel like somebody does poke us, we're going to respond, and we're going to respond on the field. And I just don't think you should ever give anybody an extra reason to beat you, and I don't think you should disrespect the great game that we have. I feel like our kids do a good job of that. We try to keep all of our comments and our cheers and our enthusiasm. Sierra Walding's probably the best example. Briley Weber's another. They are huge energy givers in the dugout, and they constantly, everything that comes out of their mouths has to do with our team and our players having success, which in turn fuels positive actions and body language from people around them. We don't need to, address everything that everybody else is doing unless somebody makes us, and we will do that on the field if we need to. But I just feel like anybody I've ever been around, is not, that's had success at a high level. And I've been fortunate to be around some really, really professional individuals in my time. Nobody's ever been focused on those things. Yet we reward that a lot in society, and I just don't like the way that's going. I think you said it best. Act like you've done it before, and celebrate the joy of the game. It's hard, to knock in a run. It's hard to get on base. And you should celebrate those things. But, what we're ultimately trying to do is score you as a team. So those are the things that we need to really value, not, I need my picture taken because I got on base. That's not it. So if we're valuing those things as a team, you'll celebrate those things and you'll get a lot more out of it, because nobody does this alone. I said this the other day, there people have praised some of the things I've done coaching. Well, I don't do that without Courtney and Jimmy. And, I don't have the resources to do a lot of the things that I can do without Dr. Campbell and Nathaniel Ledbetter and many others. So it's not about me or doing what I'm doing. It's about, I'm in a position where my first job is to hopefully empower everybody else that's underneath me to do the best job that they can. And so, those are the things that you need to value consistently, as we're going on a journey to win a championship. And that's the way things should be managed in anything, in my opinion. We talked about that in the Army a lot, of servant leadership. And, that's something that I feel like you can go look at the average CEO salary these days. I wouldn't necessarily say that that's priority number one relative to what they're making, with workers in some companies. And you could get me going on Amazon here in a minute, but you don't have enough time on this show. So I'll just stop there. But it's definitely what I believe for sure.
Yeah, because everybody wants to see you win on that scoreboard, but they don't care about a player flipping a bat and beating their chest. That's the last thing I want to see when I go to any kind of sporting event. Well, Coach, one other thing, it's about to get to the end of time. Got to go down to Bay Minette to play Coastal South, big series. and I know you don't know exactly when you are going to leave, but kind of what is the travel plan? This is one of the few times during the year where you're going to go down and spend the night. This is going to be kind of a fun trip for the girls. It should be. They should be able to enjoy it. But kind of tell us what the plans are going down to Bay Minette.
Yeah, it's kind of a business trip like anything else. We will practice on Wednesday, and then we'll head down. We will pull over, I think, a couple times to eat because it is a pretty good trip. We'll check in down at the hotel down there, and then we've got a 12 o'clock start the following day, so we'll be up pretty early. Knock out our team meetings, early on, eat, hit there, and then get rolling, immediately after that. And taking care of business. So it's, it'll be good weather. I think we're, sitting at around 75, 80 degrees. They're a little bit north of, the interstate down there. So you're not like right on the bay or the water, but you're not too far away. It'll be, but it'll be a good experience for us. They'll have a good team. They've had a winning team down there for as long as I can remember. Those kids know how to win. It'll be a challenge for our players. So we need to be ready to go, and then, the coin flips immediately. We get on a bus and go home, on Thursday night. It'll be a late, arrival for us. We've got to get some rest. We'll go and get some work done on Friday, and then they'll be up, the following day to play us on Saturday. So, it's taxing for both teams, but, we've got to go in with an attitude of embracing adversity right away, because this is challenging. We did a good job of that in the fall on a much, much longer road trip, to McNeese State and then to Louisiana Tech. And, we didn't handle it on the front end great. We were probably as good as, I saw us all fall on the second day. So we're certainly capable of doing that. We've done it before. And, we've got to set our mind right, when we go to work tomorrow for sure.
Well, you got to feel confident about this team. People don't realize played Wadsville. They've been the team in the conference that's walked the walk. Your team was not scared of this big stage. I mean, they came out, played their game, and you expect much of the same because this team has really grown in confidence, especially over the last 4 or 5 series.
Yeah, we don't really, for us, we don't really. Yeah, we're we know the opponents we're playing. We think of them in terms of the strength and weaknesses standpoint, what they have that can, they do well, what they have that they don't do well. We're obviously going to try and attack and prevent those, as best we can. But ultimately, we're playing against a game, and ultimately, what'll get us beat or not, all right, will be how we respond to the factors within the game to win. And so, for us, it's always about playing against the game. We're going into situations or things that we're doing team-wise on the field. We've got to be better at those items. Sometimes we can win a game and not play against the game very well. And so, like the other day, I thought there's some things that we need to do better without question, or it's going to bite us, eventually. So we've always got things that we need to improve, and we've got to be humble enough as coaches and players to look at those items, put them into practice, and fix them as soon as possible as we move on to the next engagement.
Yeah, I understand. Well, Coach, over the weekend, you talked about this, had some sickness, a little bit of injury issues. Do you feel like you've gotten enough rest here the first part of the week? You should be healthy going into the weekend.
Yeah, I feel a little better about it. I mean, it's gonna continue. Fortunately, none of that was just totally debilitating for anybody involved, but it's going to continue as we move forward. There will be little nicks, bumps, bruises. Hopefully, it's nothing severe, but that's the time of year that we're in. People are going to be sore. They're going to be tired. They're going to be sick. It's going to be hot, and that was kind of what we talked about this week, kind of borrowing, a speech that Saban had given years ago about, what does it take to break you? Is it the weather? Is it your own frustration? Is it an external factor like, the school board or your last at bat? All of those things need to be thought of, going in. Because if there's a mindset that nothing is going to break me, I'm going to continue to work through the process to get where I need to go, then chances are you're going to be successful. And so, the further that the season goes on, the more adversity and the more fatigue and all those things come in. You've got to kind of bring your own guts and get through that. And in that sense, Saturday was a great win because there's going to be more of that. There's going to be more of that without question. So, we feel like we're in a good spot to be prepared, this week, and we've got to value the work and go after Coastal for sure.
Yeah. Well, Coach, I want to wish you the best. I'll turn you back over to Howie and let him finish it off. But it's been a good ride so far. I've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed to get to watch this team grow because they definitely have, and then hopefully bigger things are to come.
Yep, I appreciate it. Thank you, Phil.
Coach, got a couple questions. We're going to let you get out of here. It's a busy week for you, a big series like Phil says. So, I'm a superstitions guy, so I'm going to ask, when Addie was throwing those that no-hitter, did anybody speak to her or not speak to her? Was anything done different during that time?
No, I don't know for me if it's like, I wouldn't say it's superstitious, but I don't think my thing is I've kind of always bought into that, in the sense that, I've heard that, it's kind of an unwritten rule in baseball and softball. You don't talk about it. The reason that I don't bring it up isn't really a superstition as much as it is, I want to make sure we're focused on winning the game. And, those are fun items that come out of its incredible individual achievement. But, in a hair's breadth, I think we had that walk, late in the game that ended up disrupting the perfect game. I think, there were some tight pitches there that, I was kind of personally, pulling for Addie to get. But what entered my mind as soon as the walk is now the tying runs at the plate. That's what entered my mind. And, you can get really focused. And I think most of our players, same thing. You can get really focused on that. And then something like that happened, like a walk. We had one early in the year where she was 1 out away from a perfect game. We had a ball that we just about caught, kind of in no man's land. But again, now you've got a ball game. And I've seen games lost where you had a perfect game, no hitter, what have you. And then all of a sudden we're so focused on that our mind is moving away from what we need to do to win a game. And, that milestone in that 1 minute, can go from, wow, so you got a perfect game, to the tying run now is at play, which changes the whole dynamic of the game. So, those are things, that I think you've got to always have them, kind of be mindful of. If everybody's talking about that, they'll be focused on something that's really not conducive to winning. So that's kind of how I interpret that phrase for sure.
Did Courtney, I know you can't speak for Courtney, but did she do anything different as far as dealing with Addie in between innings or anything?
No, Addie doesn't want to be dealt with a whole lot, and I don't mean that like that's just how she is. It's, but she is, if there's, something that, needs to be said, she will take it, and she's very coachable in that regard. But how she rolls, she doesn't need a lot of feedback, especially when things are going well. She doesn't talk a whole lot or any of that. She just does what she needs to do. And that's how she is. Aaron Harrelson's very different. Aaron Harrelson needs a lot of feedback. Aaron Harrelson, sometimes we'll get into a little bit of like a robotic mode and then have a conversation with Courtney, and instantly, this is kind of her superpower, will fix it. She will take, oh, okay, I'm aware that I need to do that now. Boom, it's done. And she's very, very adjustable in that regard. But they're two different people, so I think you've got to have, a pulse on, kind of the subject of who you're talking about, and let them go. Some of them don't need as much. Some of them need a lot. So, that's the part that I think on the human element of coaching will never change. That's why I'm so against, numbers only driving decisions in a game, because you're never going to replace the feel you have with a human. You just won't. So I think those are things to definitely keep in mind as we move forward, for sure.
Absolutely. Changing subject a little bit, national championship tonight. Who do you got, UConn or Michigan?
I watched Michigan, Arizona. I had kind of the same thought that Charles Barkley had. I thought those teams outside of maybe Duke were definitely head and shoulders to everybody else. I was a little bit iffy on how – I'll be honest with you, I was wrong in my prediction. I thought the guard play was pretty even going into that game, and it wasn't. Michigan, the big guys got a lot of the ink, in that game, and certainly they were really good players. But, you could see the assist numbers at the end of the first half. I think it was like 17-3, with like a minute to go in the second half in terms of, Michigan dishing out assists versus Arizona. Now UConn's got a great coach. They've obviously won it before. Stranger things have happened in finals. If I were betting and I don't do that, I would say Michigan. I thought they were as dominant as I've ever seen a team play in a game against a really good Arizona team. So I don't know. That would be my prediction, but it's a national championship game. On the women's side, I would have thought South Carolina, after what they did to UConn, would have just walked away with it against UCLA, and I was dead wrong there too. So I think they lost by 28? Didn't see that coming. So, strange things happen in the post.
Sometimes you wonder if they spent all their energy in that aspect, because UCLA is such a senior laden team. And so that was probably the difference there. They got out early, and those seniors know how to step on your throat.
Yeah, just strange things there. I thought UConn would pace South Carolina. I really did, and that was not true. Thought South Carolina did a really good job of that game plan. And it just didn't carry over against UCLA. And some of basketball, one of the tough things about it for me is it's so matchup dependent. You can have a really good team. There's only 5 people on the floor, and if you're a really good perimeter team, and somebody can take that away from you, all of a sudden you've got to have something else that you got to do. And it's interesting. And then the other thing is how I feel like guard play is a big deal in the NCAA tournament, and I feel like the shooting, obviously, all of it matters, but you can have days where it just doesn't. It looked like from jump in that first. I think Arizona had 1 point in the first 4 minutes. I may be wrong about that.
10-1.
Yeah, and you're going, well, I'm not a genius, but that usually doesn't end well when you're playing a team as good as and as deep as Michigan is. So it's a fun thing. I love the tournament. I've been watching it since I can remember. And there's some really, really good teams and some good matchups. But if I were going to say one way or the other, it's just hard to see anybody beat Michigan. But I say that, and we may be in for a big upset tonight. We'll see.
Absolutely. End of the show, Coach. Shout outs, and then we'll let you get going.
Yeah, I just want to thank all of our people that have been supporting us. We've really picked up a following. Just looking at my social media accounts, periodically. We picked up. Our recruiting base has certainly expanded. Recently, and we appreciate all the support. We appreciate everybody. We traveled well the other day at Snead. I thought that was it almost felt like it was a home game away. So just really, really mindful of all the people that are supporting us. We've had a ton of college coaches call us from all over the country. So just very grateful for that. We're grateful for you guys to putting us on the show and hearing our side of the stories as far as Northeast Alabama softball goes. So thank you all for that for sure.
Coach, we appreciate your time tonight. Best of luck this week. Apologize for all the technical issues on my side, Phil's side. Seems like Coach Joe Guthrie is the only one that's got it going on the technical issue part of it. So
just lucky today. Yeah, just lucky today.
We appreciate your time. Like I said, best of luck. Safe travels heading down Wednesday, and go get that W and keep the ball rolling and come back with 2 wins.
I appreciate it, guys. You guys have a great week, and thank you for all you do for us.
Hey, thank you, Coach.
I'll see you sometime, probably Wednesday at some point. I'll try to get up with you, and then, of course, I'll see you on Saturday.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys. We look forward to that.
So for Phil Harris, I'm the Howard Chaney, and of course, the star of the show is Coach Joe Guthrie of Northeast Alabama Community College Softball Mustangs. #1 in the nation. They're going to keep that streak going come Thursday. So thanks for joining us, everybody, and good night. God bless.